On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in the performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. Further support is provided by CharlotteMecklenburg Library, one of America's leading urban public libraries, delivering exceptional services and programs with a mission to improve lives and build a stronger community. And by the Arts and Science Council, Charlotte-Mecklenburg's resource hub and lead advocate for the regional cultural community, providing culture for all.
I think it is about making choices. It is about saying, here's the thing I value, and here's the thing that other people value, and can we connect around that? And I don't own it. We do. And can we change this perspective from me as leader to we as leaders? And I think that actually unifies people around these issues of social justice, equity, the needs that we have as a society. If we can think more from the perspective as we're all in this together as leaders, as opposed to, well, you are and I'm not, or I am and you aren't. Again, that creates that divisive perspective that I think is what we're experiencing.
Dave Newell prepares students for lives of leadership and service. He is director of the Chidsey Center for Leadership Development at Davidson College. He serves as the principal resource for the campus community on leadership development and education. Dave is also the owner and lead consultant of Evolve Leadership Consulting, a learning, development, and strategy consulting firm dedicated to helping organizations function at their highest level. Prior to his work at Davidson College, Dave was Director for Leadership and Community-Based Service at Gustavus Adolphus College. In this episode, we explore preparing students for leadership, how to be a better leader no matter what age we might be, being present in the moment, and fulfilling the desire to serve. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Dave, welcome.
Thanks, Mark. This is really great. I appreciate you doing this with me.
Dave, you are the director of the Chidsey Center for Leadership Development at Davidson College. What is the Chidsey Center?
The Chidsey Center is a place where we have leadership programming for students. There's really two programs that we house in our center. One is the Chizzy Leadership Fellows, which is a 3-year-long program for sophomores, juniors, and seniors, where we examine what it means to be a leader, and we kind of look at it through multiple different lenses and give them a really in-depth, hands-on experience. The other piece is we have the opportunity to bring back alumni and other local folks who are doing really great things in the world and highlight them once a semester through our leadership series. And so it's really a place, I think, on campus where we can do deep dives into leadership. And I think it's unique that we have kind of long-term programming for students.
How did the Chidsey Center come about?
It came about through a generous gift from John and Lisa Chizzy, who graduated from Davidson. John went on to be the CEO of Burger King and has done a lot of philanthropic giving here to Davidson. He currently serves as the chair of the board and has been highly involved. His experience on campus, I think, was really influenced by staff and faculty that, really kind of took him in under their wing and gave him an opportunity to grow as a leader. And I think he was looking to recreate that experience here for other students. And so he gave a really generous gift to create the center and the programming. And so we've been able to kind of pass on that legacy to these students because of that generosity.
What do you see as your charge as director of the Chidsey Center?
My charge is ultimately to live out the mission of the college, which is to prepare students for lives of leadership and service. I feel really drawn to that mission. It's part of the reason why I was inspired to work here. And I think, that is a moving target at times in terms of what leadership is and what it looks like and what it needs to be for students. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is help students build their leadership capacities so that they can go on and make a positive impact in the world.
How is your time divided, Dave?
There's really 3 or 4 ways that I spend my time here as the director. One is really focusing in on student leadership development through our Chizzy Fellows program. And so that happens in multiple ways, but ultimately it's about building relationships with students in one-on-one coaching situations, in large group settings, in delivering a curriculum that kind of meets students where they're at, but also pushes them to what's next. Also, developing relationships off campus with local Charlotteans and other folks here that are doing leadership and are aware of and are pushing the boundaries and helping me to see what the landscape looks like. I feel really fortunate to be able to connect with a lot of folks off campus and with alumni of the college who are willing to contribute their time and insight into what we're doing here as a program. And then lastly, it's supporting other colleagues on campus in their leadership development efforts and them supporting me. Ultimately, we view leadership development here at Davidson as a holistic piece. Everybody should be doing it. And so, I view myself as part of a collective effort in doing leadership development, and I'm fortunate to be surrounded by colleagues who are good at what they do.
Dave, there are many definitions of leadership. I read a response that you gave that leadership is about the choices we make. Could you say more about that?
Yeah, I think that ultimately leadership is so definable that it's hard to define, meaning that if you have an interpretation and an understanding of what leadership is for you and it works, it's probably correct. And so I think, with that as the backdrop, ultimately, I think leadership is this thing that people feel like they need to attain, but it's hard to see it. It's a hard thing to just define and nail down in simple terms. And so what I've tried to do is take leadership from this kind of big amorphous moving target down to in moment to moment choices that we're making. And so it might be as simple as, well, how am I showing up with this person that really frustrates me? Or how am I showing up with a person that I really enjoy? Or who do I want to be in this environment? And bringing it down to intentional choices. And that leadership shows up in these moments. And ultimately, the collection of those choices together forms this bigger, greater perspective of what leadership is.
What should inform those choices?
Well, there's really 3 areas that I think about in informing what those choices are and where that intention comes from. One is this perspective of self. Of who am I, what do I care about, what am I good at, what are my values, and really having a sense of what that is and making choices from that awareness and knowledge. The second place is ultimately understanding that leadership doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? We don't do it in isolation, we do it in relationship with other people. So understanding who am I, but in the context of what does that mean for other people? So can I pay attention to what the needs of other folks are? And that can be scalable. That could be an interpersonal conversation, a team, a group, an organization. And the third piece is thinking about the cultural and systemic implications. And so how am I being influenced both as an individual and in how I see other people because of the systems that I operate in or the cultures that I operate in? And if I can have awareness of those 3 things and make decisions with those 3 pieces informing those choices, then ultimately I think we're preparing ourselves to make better leadership choices more often.
Moment to moment as we live our lives, we hardly have those 3 ideas in mind. What advice do you give to someone who is trying to live authentically and to lead on how to manage their lives moment to moment?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think there are a couple things that I think of. One is, what is a question that you can ask yourself as you enter spaces that will help call you back to those intentions? So it might be, you're walking into a meeting and you ask yourself, well, what can I do to best be of service to people in this room right now? And that choice might be, hey, I could either be really nice or I might have to say this really hard thing I don't want to say, but that's the best thing I can do for people in the room right now. And so sometimes it's just asking that question to call yourself back to intention. And 2, I think the kind of continual reflective practice of, okay, so I was in this space, I did make that decision, I did say the hard thing, and that felt really good, but what did I learn from that? And so there's this proactive question asking on the front end and proactive question asking on the back end of what did I learn now because I did that. And I think that calls us into intentional thinking in spaces.
Dave, you and I teach leadership. A common question that I get, which I'm sure you get as well, is how do you teach leadership? What do you say?
I think teaching leadership is ultimately about asking questions and inviting people into their own knowledge and their own wisdom. I think every one of us has a really good example of what leadership is. Someone in our lives that we might say, oh, it's this person. This is the person that really helps me see that. And in unpacking what that might mean, yes, there are theories and tools and practices and things we know that we can engage students in, but if they can't understand that well enough to turn around and apply it in their own life, then what are we teaching them for? So I think there's a real emphasis around, okay, can you understand the theory or the thinking? That's great, but if you can't apply it, then so what? So let's both focus on theory and then practice, and then the last piece would be reflecting on that again, kind of similar to once you try something, what did you learn? And now let's try it again. And then it turns into an iterative process.
There is that classic methodology of teaching leadership that you just referred to: theory, practice, reflection. I'm wondering if you could take just a moment to explain that further. And then a different model, which is powerful questions for emergence. But first, let's take on theory, practice, reflection.
Yeah, so theory, practice, reflection is, I don't really know when it started, but it's been an age-old practice in training and development world, ultimately. The idea of theory, practice, reflection is that, focusing on an idea. So what's the concept that you want somebody to understand, which is the theory piece. The practice then is a practical application, and that can be done through experiential learning situations. It can be done through case studies. There's no real shortage of ways that someone can apply that. And then the third piece is reflection. And a quote that I think about quite a bit is a John Dewey quote, which is, we don't learn by doing, we learn by thinking about what we do. And I think that's really powerful. The caveat is if you're not doing anything, you don't have a whole lot to think about. So, the theory, practice, reflection is a way to invite students into, or invite anyone into thinking about leadership, applying leadership, and then learning from that practice. Ultimately, then the practice and reflection inform the theory. And so it becomes this kind of cyclical process.
Too often, leadership really doesn't touch on all three. Often it's too much theory, or practice without theory, or not enough reflection about the theory and practice. So all three are really necessary for a full immersive experience in leadership.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And there is this new model, which you've written about, called Powerful Questions for Emergence. Talk more about that.
Yeah, the idea of powerful questions for emergence is that often questions can be used as an experience if we are answering those questions in relationship to other people. And so I come from a background of community engagement and leadership development. And a lot of my community engagement efforts stem from or pull from people's lived experience. And so it's not to say we need to have theory and then a new practice. It's like most folks have experienced something along those lines, and that could be teamwork. It could be whatever platform. But can we draw from those experiences to learn from one another? And so in that sense, a collective idea of how that is applied can be created through conversation with other people in meaningful ways. And the way to do that is to ask powerful questions.
Dave, you are teaching leadership to a select cohort of students on the Davidson campus. What are you seeing in that population of students?
I see a real strong desire to make a positive impact. I think most of the students in our cohort are really committed to bettering the world. And often that comes through making it more just and equitable for all people. We are fortunate to have a great deal of diversity in our cohorts, and we really emphasize and really target as mixed of a population as we can, because we understand that both experiential diversity and cognitive diversity ultimately brings the best type of learning environment. And so if we can expand our worldviews and see things from other folks' perspectives, we're more likely to go out into the world and act differently than the patterns that have come before us.
Dave, the students you teach are precocious, intelligent, motivated. What are areas of opportunity that you see in teaching them?
Yeah, I think our students are really driven. They're very intelligent. They have a lot of energy, and they think a lot about future success. And they think about, I need to be successful. That's a phrase that comes out. And I think there's a lot of pressure on students to be successful. And I think that, where an opportunity for us is to dive into what is success and what does that mean and what does that look like. It could be moving up in a career and being the CEO of something or executive director of something, or it could be I was a really good community member and I did a lot for my community. And so I think we have an opportunity to meet students in a place where we can question some of these assumptions about what success and leadership looks like and just meet them there. Again, it's not to sway them in one direction or another, but it's about asking the question and allowing students and others that engage with them to ultimately just question what is success and what is leadership.
Let's pick up on that question of success. The motto on the North Carolina state flag is esse quam videri, which is Latin for to be rather than to seem. Are the students you teach more interested in being a leader or seeming to be a leader to be perceived as successful?
I think the answer to that question is probably yes, meaning I think that is both end. I think there's a lot of pressure to be in positions of leadership. So I need to be the president of this organization, or I need to be the best at ... And I think that isn't necessarily the perspective of leadership that we're trying to get across. Yes, be the president of an organization, but who are you being while you're being the president of that organization? And our motto in the Chidsey Center is lead from where you are. And our general perspective is that we're, to quote Chris Loney, that we're all leading all the time, either well or poorly. And so what we're inviting students into thinking about is who are you being regardless of what position that you're in. And that's ultimately where leadership is in those places of being.
How would you describe the state of leadership in America today?
I would describe it in a couple different ways. One, I would say I think there are pockets of exceptional leadership, and I think there are pockets of less exceptional leadership. I think there are, if you look at it in kind of the global perspective and where, the news that we consume really paints a picture of leadership isn't working, right? Like it's this kind of siloed, one-sided me versus you, divisive language, arguing, fighting. But I think then if you bring it down into local communities, you start to see people that are unifying and rallying around shared values and shared ethic. If I look at my own community, I have neighbors that are displaying incredible leadership as stay-at-home moms or as just people who care about their community. And so I think it depends upon the scope in which we're looking at it. I think the global news, or looking at it in that scale, really paints a picture of leadership that is divisive. But when you bring it down into my personal landscape, I see leadership really positively taking place.
When you say that leadership on the national level is less than good, isn't it rather awful?
Yeah, I think in many ways it is. But at the same time, I think it kind of depends upon what perspective you're looking at it, right? I would say, if you look at it in the national level, there are great examples of terrible leadership, and there are great examples of good leadership. I think, the students in Parkland, Florida who are coming together and standing together and asking for something that matters to them is a good example of leadership. So I would say if I'm looking at the national landscape, I can find them. And I can also find really bad examples of leadership where divisiveness and separateness and competitiveness get in the way of a unified vision of where we're going as a society and a commitment to that. I think the national landscape is, me first feels a lot like what's taking place, which we all know, we've all experienced to some degree, a me first kind of a leader, and that just doesn't feel very good to follow.
30 years ago, when I was on a campus, leadership was not taught as a discrete discipline. Today it is. And yet we see more and more examples, it seems, of the institutions of democracy being ineffective. Is leadership education failing?
I think that's a really great question, and it's something that's worth asking and examining and looking into. I would also say I think that we're going to start to see those shifts take place, right? Like I think as, you mentioned, leadership education has been in the last 20 to 30 years where it's become a focus. I'd also say that, service learning, civic engagement on college campuses and universities is 30 to 40 years old. And I think, in any kind of long-term change component, if you're looking at social justice, you're looking at equity, women's rights, women's movement, 30, 40, 50 years before you start to see a real massive shift. And I think we're on the cutting edge of it. I think I've, in my engagement with millennials and young people, I'm seeing a shift already in how they think about equity and diversity, how they think about leadership, as opposed to, baby boomers and other generations. I think there is a shift in terms of perspective. It's why there's so much conversation around, well, the millennial generation is lazy and all these things. It isn't true. They aren't lazy. They're actually incredibly gifted at connecting people and at being inspired. They just think about leadership differently.
Well, one way they think about it is they all claim to be leaders. And they're told that they're leaders, and they're told that everyone in an organization is a leader. If everyone is a leader, is anyone leading?
Yes. So I would be a proponent for everybody leading all the time. And I would argue that is possible, because at times leadership might mean not saying the thing that you think you need to say. It might mean being quiet. It's maybe it's semantics to say everybody's a leader or they're not, or a follower, or, I don't necessarily like the language of follower. I get where it's coming from. But at the same time, I think, it comes back to this piece around choice. I think it is about making choices. It is about saying, here's the thing I value, and here's the thing that other people value, and can we connect around that? And I don't own it. We do. And can we change this perspective from me as leader to we as leaders? And I think that actually unifies people around these issues of social justice, equity, the needs that we have as a society. If we can think more from the perspective as we're all in this together as leaders, as opposed to, well, you are and I'm not, or I am and you aren't. Again, that creates that divisive perspective that I think is what we're experiencing.
Dave, if an adult, someone who's been out of school for many years, came to you and said, I want to be a better leader, what would you say to them?
Well, I would start to dig in a little bit around why that question matters to them now. So why are you asking this of yourself? What's leading up to that space? I think my first approach would be discovery, right? Like, kind of what is happening around you? What is that desire in you? And what do you hope to get out of it? Like, what does a better leader look like to you, and why? So I think I would approach it from a lot of questions. And once there's, kind of this discovery process takes place, and have a better sense of what that person is looking for, my ultimate approach then would be continuing to engage that person in those questions of, well, what opportunities exist in front of you right now, and what actions can you take to become that? One of my least favorite sayings is fake it till you make it. And I often switch that to be it till you see it, meaning what small steps can you take to start building leadership habits if you don't feel like you're doing that now? I would also argue that person is probably a better leader than they give themselves credit for. There are probably a lot of things that they do that are important. So how do we build on those spaces? Like, what would you say you're doing well now as a leader, and how do we continue to move forward with those pieces? Yeah, I would approach it from a question-based, let's discover, let's dig in and help you see it for yourself.
Dave, you recently wrote an article entitled, Soft Skills Are Really Hard. You said the phrase soft skills really frustrates you. Why?
Frustrates me because I think soft is a way to diminish the difficulty of those skills. And I think it's a fear-based term. I really think it's a way to say, oh, no, those are just soft skills. What we really need to focus in on is the hard things. And I just think, I don't think most folks intend to diminish the importance of those skills. In fact, I think it's the opposite. I think there's a growing awareness around how important it is to have things like empathy, social awareness, some of the other types of soft skills that folks might think about. And to me, it's important to shift the terms. And so the terms that I use are technical and adaptive skills. And those technical skills are what we would normally dub as the hard skills, right? It's the processes, it's things that are knowable and repeatable. So we can teach those. Those are technical. That's something that I can teach you and you can repeat again and again and again. Adaptive are the unknowable, meaning, I might learn empathy and I might have a strong sense of empathy, but that looks different depending upon who I'm talking to and when I'm talking to them and what situation they're in. And so I have to be able to interpret how to apply or how to harness my natural empathy in different situations. And so why it's unknowable is because it shifts, right? Like there's no end to empathy, where there might be an end to a technical process. And so those two things are both alive all the time. And so it's not to say one is more important than the other. It's to say they're both important. And can we think about them both as equally important as opposed to hard and soft?
Why do you do this work, Dave?
I do this work because I don't think I could not do this work. I think I feel really called to connect with people in ways that matter, meaning I'm a natural questioner, I'm a natural challenger, I'm naturally curious, and I like to invite people into those spaces to say, we can grow. If you've read Carol Dweck's mindset book, Between Fixed and Growth Mindset, I'm very much a growth mindset kind of a person of everything's possible. And I like inviting folks into that space to say, no, there's a better version of us waiting for us to be discovered or waiting for you to discover it. So what is it? And how do we get there? And so that happens whether I'm, working with students here at Davidson or whether I'm talking to a community member or a neighbor, whatever it is. I think it's just a way that naturally I show up.
Dave, where did you grow up?
I grew up in west central Minnesota, Fergus Falls, Minnesota, which is a town of about 15,000 people. It's about an hour outside of Fargo. And no, not all people in Fargo talk like the movie, but some do. So I hope I don't come across with that much of an accent.
Can you describe the town that you grew up in?
Yeah, it's a town that ultimately has a lot of agriculture around. I grew up in an agricultural community and have family members that own farm properties. I've driven bobcats and combines and trucks full of corn, just helping out relatives doing farm community. But also it was a space where, growing up in a small town, I had the opportunity to try a lot of different things. I was in theater, I was in music, I was also an athlete, and got to have kind of all sorts of different experiences that I think had I grown up in a much larger place, I might have had to pick one or the other. So I feel like it gave me an opportunity to live a well-rounded childhood and try lots of different things.
Your parents were educators?
Yeah, so my mom was an elementary music teacher, and my dad worked for the government and the public sector, but ultimately is a teacher at heart. He was in management and led a lot of different management trainings and was our coach in basketball and tennis. And, it was always finding ways to be a teacher. And my mom is a natural teacher as well. It's really fun to have her come and visit the grandkids, and they're always doing music lessons and learning things. And I think that as a model for me is part of the reason why I feel like a natural educator.
What would you say you learned from them?
I learned a lot of things from them. Ultimately, I felt like I had a really privileged and loving childhood. I mean, we weren't wealthy by any means, but what was modeled for me was civic engagement and giving back and a humble, hard work ethic, meaning we'll show up and we'll contribute and we'll bring value, but we're not asking for anything in return. But if we get something in return, great. And I think that has permeated my life, just as having parents that can role model that for me and continue to do that. And I hope we can pass that on to our children.
How would your parents have described you growing up?
I think they would have described me as goofy, entertainer. Charming is a word they used a lot. I could, flash a smile and maybe get some extra candy, something like that. I was the youngest of three boys and also the smallest at 6'6". So I was always looking for advantages. And I think for me, my advantage was, just entertaining and being kind of fun loving. And I think that's how I got my attention as a kid.
You are a 6'6" white male in America.
Yeah.
How do you think you've benefited from that?
Well, other than the discomfort of plane rides, pretty much most ways possible. I think it's a question that I sit with quite a bit of, I have been privileged. I have had these opportunities. And, as a white male who has pretty much every one of, if you look at all the isms, I'm kind of at the top of the spectrum in terms of privilege. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of responsibility in that. I've found opportunities in my life to step out of those spaces. I did a program where I was making $700 a month and my rent was $530 a month for a year, and I was living on food stamps. And really, I had the privilege of being a visitor in that space, knowing that I could get out of it. But at the same time, I felt a really strong call to unpack what that life was like and to experience it and to see it. And once you get into it, you can't help but build compassion and empathy and understand your privilege better and how you might use it to actually positively impact those around you.
What did you learn about yourself when you went through that program?
I learned that I was spending money in silly ways. I learned how to do a lot of things for free, which is great, and I still carry that with me. If there's a free meal, I will likely show up, and I still carry that with me. But I also think I have a natural propensity for sitting in spaces that feel difficult. I am naturally drawn towards hard conversations or conversations about complexity, things that are really complex. And I just enjoy being in those spaces. And I think that was my first experience when I was living on food stamps, where I really felt like, oh, okay, like these are my people. This is the place I'm supposed to be, and I'm learning a lot. And I think that's where the natural curiosity became a thing that I valued, right? Because I could meet people where they were and sit with them in that space. And it wasn't about solving problems. It wasn't about, I'm here to fix you. It was about, no, I'm here to sit next to you and be in community with you.
What program was it?
It was an AmeriCorps program. I was doing community-based learning work at Western Washington University. And so I had an opportunity, which is in Bellingham, Washington. So I had an opportunity to lead community projects. I was working with, it was kind of my first dabble into higher education. I was working with faculty, community partners, and students to design service projects that also accentuated the learning components that the faculty were looking to get out of it. So I had a lot of opportunity to go and work with nonprofit sector, but I was also, going to food banks on the weekends, and I was living on food stamps, and I was filling out really difficult paperwork to get access to those things. And so I felt really fortunate to be able to see and experience the other side of what my life had been. I'd always been fortunate enough, that those weren't concerns for me, and really felt at home in that space.
Dave, you went to a small liberal arts college. Where did you go and what did you study?
I went to Gustavus Adolphus College. It's a small liberal arts college of about 2,400 students in southern Minnesota. I studied communication studies. I originally went for psychology. I made it about 3/4 of my first year in college as a psychology major before I realized how much technical hard science it was, and realized that wasn't really the path I was looking for. I was ultimately looking for a program that would help me understand how people function together. I've always been really interested in human dynamics, and I found that communication studies was that space, and I was able to understand how and why people communicate the way they do, and look at rhetoric and look at messaging, but also understand and explore through my own research the importance of how we communicate. And I think that was my first, that space felt like what I was looking for in communication studies.
Who were you on campus?
I think I carried with me less of an academic aura and more of a social aura. I was engaged in a lot of different things, a lot of different activities, organizations. I was in a music band for a while. I was on the basketball team. I was a peer assistant, which did a lot of social programming for students. And I found a lot of value in those spaces. And I think I've always been a person that's engaged with other people, and that's where I find my joy. And so I think in college, that's where I spent most of my effort.
Were you the person on campus you wanted to be?
At times, I think maybe I can be kind to myself. I think there were definitely opportunities that I wish I would have taken looking back on it, knowing that, college is really a space where you can explore and learn things. I think I would have worked a little harder in the academic category looking back, but I think socially, in terms of what I engaged with outside of the academics was really who I was. And I think that has shaped where I've ended up.
You like campus life, don't you?
I really do. I've enjoyed the college atmosphere. It's why I work on one. And I think the piece that I like about it the most is there's so much positivity towards what the future can be. And as a person who embraces the possibilities of life, a college environment has so much possibilities. Students come in and I want to study this so I can do this thing. And it's all possible. And so it becomes this platform where we can help them take the steps that they need to take to get to that place. And I find that incredibly exciting.
You then went to the University of St. Thomas in Minneapolis and earned a master's degree. What did you study?
I studied leadership and student affairs, and there are kind of two tracks within the student affairs realm. One is organizational development, leadership perspective. The other is counseling. And this program was much more focused on the organizational development side of it. And for me, it was really the first time that I dove into the academics. And it opened me up to systems thinking. It opened me up to understanding how things function. And so that kind of natural propensity for understanding people was now informed by the systems and the structures that influence those people. And so I started to see the whole landscape as opposed to piece by piece. The whole picture became much more clear to me. And I found that to be just incredibly life-giving and has really shaped how I perceive not only leadership, but community engagement and how I live my life.
Dave, did you ever think about becoming a professor?
I did, yeah. And I still actually think about it on occasion. I think I kind of live in this space of, I really enjoy the study of leadership. I really enjoy the study and kind of the higher perspective that research and academics can bring. But I'm also very much a person who gets antsy and wants to apply things. And so I find that I kind of sit in this middle space of, I want to have these big conversations and I want to understand and I want to think about theory and I want to, kind of be curious and use that curiosity. And I also want to go do something with it that's very practical and has a positive impact. And it's not to say that those two things are necessarily separate or distinct. I think there are many faculty and there are many appliers who do both of those things really well. I think it's just a space for me where I find myself kind of pulled back and forth between those two spaces.
After you earned your master's degree, what happened next?
Well, I was working full-time while working on my master's. And so, 40 hours a week working and 20 hours a week in grad school was difficult, but at the same time was really life-giving because as I was studying in my master's program, a situation would show up the next day in work that we were talking about the night before. And I felt like I had this really great, being able to be in academics and at the same time applying. But what I found in my master's program in studying leadership and organization is it helped me to see avenues to build leadership development into the work I was already doing. So I was serving as the director for community engagement or community-based service. And so being a community organizer, it started to help me think about, well, where are we weaving leadership into this and how are we organized? And so we ultimately went through a process on campus to figure out, well, what are the components of doing this well? What does good service look like? And we started asking that question and we ultimately identified 4 things. We talked about service, serve, engage, evolve, and learn were ultimately the 4 categories that we came up with. Service being the hands-on capacity, learning being a commitment to learning something, right? Like we're doing service, so what does it mean? Evolve was that needs constantly change, and are we paying attention to those changes and adapting to those needs? And engage was about relationships. It was to say if we're going to do service well, that we need to be in relationship. And so ultimately my master's allowed me to think about what I was doing at a larger scale and how are we organizing ourselves in a way that ensures that leadership development is showing up.
Let's pick up on the word evolve, because you started a leadership consultancy for professional organizations called Evolve. Tell me about that work.
Yeah, so this was work I ultimately wasn't necessarily intending to do. But what I discovered is that, through my background in community engagement, through my background in leadership development, is that I could bring value to other people. And as I was out, doing professional development situations or whatever it was, or just community engagement, there were people talking about things like generally, well, we've got this group and we have this project and we need this thing, but we can't figure out how to get there. And I found that I could meet people in that space and help them kind of work through it. So ultimately, the work of Evolve is working with organizations or individuals that are misaligned, that are looking for opportunities to grow, but they don't know how to get there, or finding themselves in a difficult situation and they can't find the path out. So I provide the space, the conversation, and the development to help them find that path, to help them feel aligned, to help them or their organization move forward in the way that they're looking for.
What was your last role at Gustavus?
It shifted 4 times while I worked there. I worked there for a while. I started out just doing community-based programs, and then it turned into directing those community-based programs, and then it turned into adding a leadership component. And so I had community-based service and leadership, and actually was leading a program called the Servant Leadership Program.
So in addition to leading this servant leadership program, you had your consultancy on the side.
I did, yeah.
How did you find your way to Davidson?
I found my way to Davidson ultimately by chance. My wife and I and family were really happy where we were. I really enjoyed Gustavus. It's a great place. It's our alma mater. But at the same time, I couldn't see what was next for me at the institution, and I felt like I needed to grow in a different way. And so started searching and found this opportunity here at Davidson to run the Chidsey Center. And it was a really great fit for where I was looking to grow as a professional and as an individual, which was to step more fully into the leadership development work. And then was fortunate enough to be selected for the position.
Now that you are in the position, how is it different than how you might have imagined it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, when I came in, it had been directorless for a little over a year and a half. And so part of what drew me to this position was the opportunity to develop curriculum and shape a leadership development program. We had some folks that from outside the institution and from inside the institution do an internal and external review, which was really helpful to understand, well, what can this program be moving forward? And so my charge has ultimately been to kind of reshape this program in a way that, students can really benefit from a leadership development perspective. So my work has largely been, I've been here for a little over a year. My work has largely been just focusing in on this program and making sure that it is what it needs to be.
Is it what it needs to be?
I think we're getting there. I think we're on our way to what it needs to be. There's a piece that feels incomplete to me right now. I think what we've done that has worked really well is to dive into rebuilding relationships, both with students and kind of building an interest and advocacy for students about the center and the work that we're doing, and also kind of continuing to build positive reciprocal relationships with individuals off campus who have contributed to the program. I'd say those have been our biggest successes. I'd say a space that we're still looking at is how the application of leadership theory. So I think our curriculum is rich in terms of what we're talking about. I think we're still trying to find ways to how do we help students experience this so that it's in their bones when they graduate. And I think that's a space we're continuing to play with.
Dave, you teach leadership, but now you're also leading a center. Those are 2 very different things. What have you learned about yourself as a leader of a center?
In some ways, things that I already knew coming into it. I know that I'm a future-oriented person. I'm often thinking about what's possible and finding ways to move towards that possibility. And I'm also a highly relational person, and then I like to build a community of people. Where I continue to find avenues for growth is in kind of sticking with and focusing down on particular approaches. And I'm fortunate to have an assistant director who's an exceptional executor. And so I might come up with 100 ideas a week, and she can say, well, these 2 are good. Let's not do the other 98, and let's execute on this. And I think we're a good yin and yang kind of a team in that way.
Do you think great leaders in the world would have any idea what we talked about today?
I hope so. Yeah, I think I'm the work that I do is informed by a lot of great leaders, and also misinformed by a lot of great leaders, probably. But yeah, I would hope so.
Who do you admire as a leader?
There are a lot of people that I admire as leaders. And again, I think about it as I can look to a global scale of who's making change in really big ways, but I also recognize that that's not for me. And so there are lessons that I can take from that. But ultimately, I start to think about, well, who are the people in my immediate life that are doing things really well? And those people tend to be just really genuine, authentic people. And I find myself really drawn to people that are willing to live their values and stand in that space. And it's not about being popular. It's about living for value. And those are the people that I tend to be really drawn to and find as great models for who I hope to be.
Who comes to mind?
The first person that comes to my mind is my wife. She is one of the most authentic people that I've met. She just really lives true to who she is and is really strong in that. And it's not about pleasing other people. It's about kind of standing in a space that you believe in. And she's been a good example of that, and also an accountability partner for me. But I also think about people even just in our neighborhood. We have a neighbor across the street who is willing to just step in and be of service and just really finds joy in that. And so I think even just looking across the street, I have examples of people that are really living values-based lives. And to me, that's inspiring.
Is there anything that you are questioning right now in your life?
Yeah, I think I'm always questioning things. I find that I'm a person that is a builder and enjoys creating. And so one thing I struggle with is in places where I'm maintaining things. And so I'm constantly asking and looking for opportunities where I can build and create. And so the question that I often sit with is, well, what should I be doing now? Right. And so, sometimes that's a really great question. And sometimes, I find that where I am is really the place that I should be. And sometimes I find, all right, well, maybe I can step over here, or maybe I can step over here. So, it could even be in my house, right? Like I'm having dinner with my family and I'm thinking about, wow, I should really be present here. And this is really where I should be, and feeling grounded in that. So I think I'm constantly questioning just where's the best value, or where can I bring the best value with the time that I have?
President Carol Quillen often makes the remark that she would want her students to look back on their lives one day and to feel like they have led the lives that they would have chosen. When you think about your life many years from now, what is the life that you will want to have chosen for yourself?
That's a really great question. I think right now I would look back at my life and say, hey, it's been pretty good. You've done a pretty good job. It's things that I value are family and adventure and exploration are two things that I think about a lot. And my life has really been about those two things. I think I work really hard to be present and connected to my family. I have 3 young daughters, and this is the one shot I get at them being young and small. And so I'm really committed to that, and I'm really committed to seeing them there. And the adventure piece is I've had a lot of opportunity to travel. I say yes to a lot of things because I'm just curious and I want to see what's going on. If there's one thing I hope for myself, is to continue to focus on being present. I think where I would look back at my life and say, maybe I haven't always been as present as I should be. I'm thinking about what's next as opposed to where I am. And so I would say an intention for me moving forward is to continue to be as present as possible with whoever I'm with.
You mentioned your 3 daughters. What would you say to them about leadership in words that they would understand?
That's a really good question. I find that I do engage them in things that I engage the college students in. So I'll ask questions like, what is the best choice that you can make right here? I invite them into choice a lot. Or is this the person that you want to be? So even though they're 7, 6, and 2, I'm already asking those questions, and maybe they don't get it. Maybe I'm not getting it. I don't know. But I do invite them into those questions of, you have a choice. You have the opportunity to make a choice here. And can you see that? And so ultimately, to me, it's inviting them into a growth mindset. My oldest daughter is a really great artist. And I think we're pretty conscious of not saying, you're a great artist. It's, man, you've been working really hard at art and you're doing some really great things. Let's continue to work hard on that, right? Like there's always an opportunity for us to continue to push and move. And she is a great artist. So it's inviting them into this space of, we do have choice and we can design in many ways how we show up in this world. And so whether that's landing for them or not yet is probably yet to be seen. But I hope the short-term approach has a long-term positive impact.
Dave, would you want to be a college president one day?
No, actually, I don't think that's a role for me. I think there are people that are especially equipped for that role, and I think Dr. Quillen is actually a really good example of one. I really do. For me, it's just I don't do well with politics in political situations, I guess. And I think when you're the president of anything, you have to be able to survive that and thrive in that environment. And for me, I tend to think in community organizing and collective bringing people together. And so I think for me, struggling with the politics of being in that role, it would just be overwhelming at times.
What is a larger role that you would like to have one day?
Well, a piece that continues to pull on me is the consulting work. I find that for me, where I see a lot of positive impact quickly in working with organizations in that way. And I find that it feeds that desire to be creative and problem solve that I have, and it also, aids people. It brings value to people quickly. And so I don't need to be, the world's greatest consultant or need to build a company in that sense. But I think for me, that is a piece that I constantly sit with around, there is value that I can bring there. And maybe, long term, that's where I would like to end up.
What's most important to you, Dave?
What's most important to me is living a life where other people benefit because I'm here. So I think a lot about what is the value that I'm adding or what is the value that I'm bringing. And, that doesn't happen all the time. There are definitely days where I thought, man, that wasn't very good, or man, I was really selfish, or, I really could have done that better. But I think ultimately for me, the goal in life is to bring value, positive value to other people.
Thank you for your time today, David.
Thanks, Mark. This was really great. I appreciate it.
Dave Newell is director of the Chidsey Center for Leadership Development at Davidson College. He earned a BA in Communication Studies from Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, Minnesota, and an MA in Leadership and Student Affairs from St. Thomas University in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And now, a personal word. Dave Newell is shaping the future one student at a time. He is sharing his thoughts about leadership in closed session with 48 students who are part of the Chidsey Center for Leadership Development program at Davidson College. He shares ideas about affecting change and asks questions for insight to emerge. He is a mentor and a resource. His students attend one of the most highly competitive liberal arts colleges in the nation and expect to change the world. Dave and I are in the same line of work. I teach leadership courses at Johnson & Wales University. The students I teach represent a much broader range of student preparedness and ambition. Some of my students would excel at Davidson. Other students of mine are challenged with basic reading and writing and arithmetic. All of my students want to make more of their lives. Both Dave and I are privileged to prepare young women and men for the world we know and for scenarios we can barely predict. One way we go about it is to confront how much we don't know. We pose questions that do not have certain answers. Questions such as, what is a good life? Who am I capable of being? What does the world need? What contribution can I make? What matters most today and tomorrow? We work to develop the understanding and skills that will help students live with greater intention and lead more effectively. What is leadership? As Dave noted in our discussion, there are so many definitions. Every leadership textbook has one. They range from leadership is calling people to shared purpose to effect real change, to leadership is creating cultures that empower people to achieve a desired future state. Leadership definitions are highly dependent on who is leading and the context in which leadership is happening. The definition that I like is a simple one. Leadership is reminding people what we're trying to accomplish. Leadership is an invitational act, an act of imagination, an act of emulation. It begins with describing the world as it is, giving voice to what it could be, calling people into possibility, inspiring others by being the change you want to see. The textbook I use in the classroom is entitled Practicing Leadership, Principles and Applications by Dave and Art Schreiberg. It's an uncomplicated book that offers this thesis. Leadership in the 21st century rests on two pillars, ethics and inclusion. Ethical leaders work to create positive outcomes informed by moral values, values such as honesty, integrity, and fairness. Inclusive leaders engage people who are different across dimensions in a global society, empowering collaborators from diverse cultures to solve problems and to thrive. Here are some of the subjects we study in leadership: intelligence and personality models, understanding how we are intelligent and how we affect others in different ways; motivation theories, understanding what drives us to act and what gives us resilience to continue; communication concepts, how we might craft, deliver, and decode messages that are meaningful and effective; management versus leadership, how managing process differs from leading people; power and influence, how to get it, use it, and keep from losing it; risk and reward, what we might lose and what we might gain. Like any discipline, leadership has its theories. The trick is to bring ideas to life. That's the work that comes when students pursue leadership opportunities. There are the classic routes: starting a club or organization, signing up for internships, working at a job off campus. But there is another way to practice leadership: the intention students can bring to every moment. There are two questions everyone can ask. Who do I want to be right now? What does this moment need? And how can I serve? As Dave noted, we are leading all the time, either poorly or well. One question I asked Dave was whether leadership education is failing. A case can be made that leadership across all domains of society is less than what it could be. So many people with responsibility and in positions of authority are selfish and divisive, morally compromised, imposing ill-considered approaches to complex problems, bringing more and more chaos into the world. Bad leadership is all around us, but so is good leadership. All we have to do is look to the left and to the right and see citizens of every age and type who are doing their jobs well, who care about their fellow person and community, who are devoting their time and talent in simple and profound ways to leave the world better than they found it. The challenge for anyone teaching leadership is to model what is being taught. Are we walking the talk every day? That's the part that can keep us up at night. It's the part of the job that exposes our imperfections. I know I bear the responsibility of leading my class, sharing what I know, developing skills in others, being creative, taking chances, listening intently, and honoring the person in front of me. Some days are better than others. Here is what I sense about Dave Newell. He has fully embraced the role of making a positive difference in the lives of his students. He is interested in the human condition and the patterns we create. He is modeling a life of leadership and service. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Additional support for this podcast is provided by the UNC College of Arts and Architecture, celebrating a decade of creative education in the arts and design. Thank you to our funding partners, and to my teammates, Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, Art and Media Director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value at a level you choose. Visit us also on our website, onlifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.